Hi, I'm Chris from airwindows, and I have something that's been a while in the making. This is called Console4. Console4 follows a series of plugins that I have made. The idea from these is to give the sort of spaciousness of an analog recording console in the box. Now, I've had very good success with them in previous years, previous versions, but the thing that I was trying to get together was basically glue. Not just space in the bus, but also glue. And that's a hard thing to define, but rather than define it, how about I just show you? Here is a little piece of music that I made. I've done it for a couple of reasons. It has sort of deep background reverb going on, and it's got some beats and things. And most importantly, it ends up demonstrating some things that are sometimes the case with electronic dance music. People have sometimes had issues with consoles in electronic dance music because they had difficulties getting a beat, like a kick, big enough. But before we get into that, and yeah, you might find this is might seem like a bit of a strange piece of music, but I'm just throwing this stuff together. I don't have anybody to make music for me. It's just me out here. So this is all me playing and performing all this stuff. Now, there are some things that I can demonstrate about this. For instance, Console works with logic subgroups. This stuff in the drums here is all going through console channel just like everything else. But rather than just go on about that, why don't I show you what it's like with console and without? Here is a little section that I can show. That's what it's like with console. Now I'll take it out. Here's what it's like without console. Now we'll put it back. Now, one thing you should bear in mind, I'm having to run a clipper, and the reason for that is that console generates peak energy. I'll shut it off for a moment. You'll see that sometimes it goes up higher than you want it. Console is designed to work with mixes that are constructed in the digital audio workstation to the point where they're coming out at roughly the loudness that you want in the final output. It's designed for people sort of building this stuff here. I'll shut up my crazy guitar playing for a moment and explain this part. Console is designed to work in the digital audio workstation for people, both people working professionally and also people who are putting stuff together and it's just them on their laptops or whatever. As such, not everybody gets to run to a mastering engineer defined as somebody that isn't you, who knows how to make stuff louder and also make it sound more appropriate for a wide range of speakers and things. Console's designed to run at levels around this, maybe a little hotter than that. Now, one thing I should point out that I'll skip forwards, because you don't need to listen to that over and over again, is that console doesn't want individual tracks coming out super loud on the bus. I mean, this is Console4. It's doing the same thing that previous versions of console did as far as giving a bigger space around the music when you mix it through a bus. But It still has some of the same qualities, and it's worth learning how to work with console rather than against it. Here's an example of just the backbeat constructed for that piece of music. Now you'll notice that the peaks are going up to 0.2. If I turn off the clipper, you'll see the peaks are getting pretty large, and there's a reason for that. Now let's see what happens if we're just soloing something. Like, for instance, I'll solo thump, for instance, and see how that goes. That's running into console channel. Now if I turn console off on just this, it sounds very similar. That's because it's about 7 dB below peaking. Console is designed to work with the recommendations that a lot of professional engineers would tell you. Don't record with things coming in so hot on the bus that they're near zero. You don't need to. It's not actually good. And so what I'll demonstrate now is that with this track, I can show you that if you go and do this, I can turn up the beat to the point where console channel will show you it's distorting. See, it was at about 7.3 or so down, so if I make it 7.3 up, we're starting to hear what it does. Note what's happening on console bus. Console bus is staying at about -7. It's not the same thing that's going in because the processing is in play here. Now if I was to turn off console channel so that only console bus is operating, it'll start blowing the top off of the output like this. It's designed to work with the channel plugin to have the processing kind of counter each other. And there's no sense in getting too detailed about that. The point is how it works together. I will also demonstrate that when you have console channel going, and we're already hearing the distortion, if we hyper crank that, bad things happen. Let me put the clipper back on again. Console channel works kind of like some sort of TL071 chip or something like that. It's really not meant to crank way out. There's a nasty interaction that you can get where, like if you've got your output going like that, and then you start going into console bus, it just blows up. That's 33 dB over 0. We don't want that. What you can find is you can pull it back down again. Like it was at +7 or so peaks. I'll have it go just down to 8.9, and you'll see that it's nowhere near as blowing everything up. It's actually going to go to 0 under those circumstances. And if you had this off and also the channel plugin off, you're getting the 1.9. This is how you use channel, is by not having individual tracks set up to blow everything up. It's for combining tracks. If you just have individual tracks, you might as well just run the individual tracks straight through. Channel is designed to be able to combine them in a more effective way. So we'll pull this right back down again to no gain boost. Then as we do this, we'll see that it's peaking only at about 8.9. Bear in mind another way that you can work around this is we've got this thing set up where it starts to distort if we're pushing it. and we don't want that. But if you're getting the distortion going on of the channel, because the channel plugin doesn't want to be hit that hard, you can cheat by pushing the output gain of channel, which is normally calibrated to the point where it's not going to, you shouldn't be touching it. If you can't get something loud enough through channel, like let's pretend that this is too distorted for us still, and we want to pull it back even more. We'll pull it back 3 dB. And it's already quite far down. Option click gives us the 0 again. Now it's peaking at -10. That's pretty clean, really. But if we're cheating console, by not having everything balanced out, you can sort of have an effect where this is not creating a big difference at this low volume. It's designed to combine lots of things happening at once. You can cheat it by pushing the output gain using the fader up. And that gives us a bigger peak because it's allowing that individual track to force the output to go higher. Now the thing with this is that it can get exaggerated, it can get kind of spiky. For instance, if I give it just 1 more dB, it's starting to exaggerate things a bit. It's a little bit more punchy than it's supposed to be. Now what we're going to do now is turn this back and then shut off. That track. Now what we've got is a mix that's peaking at 3 dB over the clip level. Actually, I have to turn on an 80 clip to control that. And none of the individual tracks are more than, say, -8 or so. And again, we can listen to what it sounds like. Didn't need to turn that off. By turning all of these off. And this is what that sounds like with console off. You've got a little less glue, and you've got a lot less internal space in there. It's just not providing the sort of physicality, the dimension that you want. It's gone all flat. That's normal for a digital audio workstation mix. And now let's listen to it a moment and then snap it over into the console version. Listen for the change. Now one thing that's working out fairly well with this is these hi-hats. The hi-hats are benefiting from Console4's new algorithm that allows it to have more glue. There's a sort of softness around the top of them, which is consistent with if you're running into an analog board. But with an analog board, you'll probably get a little bit dirtier, a little bit crunchier, and not quite the size that this digital mix gets. I can solo these hats and show you what it sounds like going into the, like, back hat is probably the brightest one. And I'll stick in the thump while we're at it, just so that it's more interesting. Go back to the beginning and now listen to that back hat. If I pull it back, now that's pretty crisp, but if I start pushing it up, see it's sort of flattening out a little bit. Now if I was to shut off console, I said if I was to shut off console, listen to the difference here. We've got a more flat kind of mix going on, and the top end is kind of poking out in this vaguely unnatural way that's very consistent with the digital mix. The envelope around it is kind of artificial sounding. It's a little bit plastic, it's a little bit cardboard. But now that we have it with the console going on, there's more space around everything, even with this view, and I can add more stuff. For instance, here's the TAMs. I can turn those up too. These things are how the mix bus combines stuff. The mix bus needs to combine stuff in such a way that there's space around everything, but it's also softening off the top of the high frequency impacts. That's what Console4 is designed to do. Previous versions of Console did all of this except for the glue. If you gave, for instance, Console3 this example, like notably the example with just all this bright stuff going on, or indeed just all of this stuff going on really loud, it would be kind of sparkly and sputtery. Console3 is designed for maximum air and energy, but it wasn't as good as this at gluing stuff together, particularly gluing high frequency sounds together so that there's a natural organic quality to it. But you throw it into Console4 and it's all fine. And again, well, that was strange. Well, here's another example of something that can be done. All right, that was kind of insane. Okay, let's enjoy an insane kind of drum madness thing going on. That might be fun. Now that's pretty wacky, right? That's admittedly pretty strange. I wonder if I can... That helps. So this is a pretty crazy little bit of drum madness going on. And this is with console. Now, let's pull that back to there. Now listen to how that sounds, and compare that with console being off. Again, I can solo just the drum kit tracks here. These are all running into the mix. I can turn console off, and this is a normal digital mix. I've got 80 clip on here just to suppress any peaks that it might get. Probably don't even need that. Now adjust to that sound, Listen to what happens to it when I put console in. Now you might notice we're getting more of a peak there. That's because it's doing something. The peak energy of these things combining with each other is greater than it would otherwise be. And the way console works is we're putting in a calibrated saturation effect on all the console channels. It's as clean as I can get it. It's learned a great deal from the Purist series of plugins that I did last year. And then the output applies the unsaturation, which means that it will go back to normal only when the waves add up to each other. If the waves are canceling each other out, it acts like it's running through a mixing board where the output impedances of the channels fight each other. Like if they're feeding into each other and the one is positive and the one is negative, they kind of distort a little earlier and you don't get it in the output. Turns out that is how your big analog console board sounds like. And your better boards are so good with their circuitry that they develop a kind of DAW-like sound and might be overly clean. Console4 is pretty good at, for instance, smoothing out. I'll demonstrate it again. So there's the digital audio workstation version of it again. You can hear the sort of, the individual sounds are clear enough. DAWs have no problem being clear, but they're all kind of coming from the same space, and it's kind of flat. Whereas when you have the console version of it, it's smoothing off some of the top, it's doing that glue thing, and it's doing the interchannel thing so that the space in the mix is coming back out again like you would have in an analog mix. And the sounds no longer sound like they're coming from the same space in this two-dimensional way. There's a three-dimensionality to them that works out. And you can even have deep background stuff going on. Okay, that's a pretty silly thing to play, but it is what it is. And let's just add synths to it while we're at it. Now, one thing about this, it might be a pretty dumb piece of music to play, and a silly guitar notes, but listen to where it's sitting in the mix. It's absolutely plain that it's sitting in one place in the mix. Now, if I remove console, for one, we're not going to peak as hot. You might not notice a big difference in sound. That's because this peaking is happening in the kind of areas where you wouldn't normally hear it. That's one of the reasons that an analog mix sounds different, is that it'll have that stuff going on when the sounds combine additively with each other. So there we are. Now, quick A/B of no console, and then I'll switch over to console in the middle of doing it. We could leave that music alone for the time being. Part of the reason I'm using this particular kind of music is to demonstrate that Console can work with electronic media as well. Pretty much if you already design sounds by layering them, this is what you're going to want. The difference between layering stuff in just a digital audio workstation and layering stuff off of separate tracks in Console is pretty huge. I think you probably just heard some of that. So basically the idea is you'll want to be layering stuff in Console on individual tracks wherever possible. If this becomes cumbersome, you can use things like this. Here is my little Logic track folder, and I stuck all of the drum kit stuff into there, and I can combine them in there, solo things if I want, and this submixing doesn't hurt anything as far as Console's functionality. Console works by having the individual tracks go into this and then go into a mixing stage where between console channel and console bus, it's unity gain and it's all just combining and summing. You can even do interesting things like okay, let's make this happen. Okay, check this out. This is using echo effects inside Console because when you echo things, delay them, multiply them, or reverberate them, if you do that inside Console, you get to use the benefit of that. First, we'll hear what it sounds like without Console. That's what you would expect out of a simple added echo on things. And with Console. It's a little more dynamics and space in there. In fact, there's so much more impact, I better throw the clipper on there. That's how Console can be used to add things inside Console, like echo and stuff. And lastly, okay, here we are with our hi-hats again. Now let's pretend we want to take this one, and this is not satisfactory enough as far as being a crazy sort of telephoned out sound. This is actually a hi-hat being recorded through a harmonica mic. It's just one of the things that I like to do with some of my sounds. You can hear that it's all mid-rangey. This is the effect that I wanted from it, but suppose that's just not enough. What we might want to do is fire up a channel EQ. Notice that that went after console channel. What that means is we can start affecting it. Now that's kind of intense. You'll notice it's blowing up the output. In fact, I'll leave the clipper off just to show that. Now we can attenuate that just to sort of demonstrate how that works. Or we could just leave it. Now, supposing that's the sound we want, what would happen if we put the channel EQ outside of console channel? Listen to this carefully. It's going to sound different. Certain kinds of effects like equalizers work well inside channel, particularly if you're not going too crazy with them. Like, that's pretty crazy. If you're doing them in front of channel, what's going to happen is you're going to get the sound going into the virtual channel processing. And whatever you do with it, for instance, this has a sort of digital sound to it. It's a very narrow bandwidth. I can make it do this crazy thing. And it's a pretty artificial sounding thing. But if we put it inside console, the many filter poles that this uses are also operating inside console. And that means that they get the analogification effect and the glue and all of the things that we want to get from it. I'll demonstrate it again. Note what happens to the signal volume, because it's going to get very much more spiky. But also note that it sounds essentially the same, except that there is a more organic quality to this extremely nasty resonant thing. It sounds more like some kind of anvil or something now. Whereas if we put it back, it's gone a little bit more digital and plastic and fake. It sounds a little bit more cardboard. Go back to here. Console4 is the newest version in the airwindows console series. It's the most successful plugin I've ever put out. And it's taken a while to bring it up to the stage where I feel it is genuinely a lot better than it was before. I have another thing kind of lurking around that I'm in the process of, and you'll be hearing about that when it's ready. But Console4 is an audio unit plugin, like all of my previous plugins. Like all other previous plugins, if you bought any version of Console ever, you get this as a free update. You may get all kinds of things as free updates. But if you don't already have some version of Console, and if you do, I'll be sending you an email, then you can buy it at airwindows.com, and it's $50. $50 for a lifetime of support, because that's how I like to treat customers. I hope you folks enjoyed this version of Console. It took a while to get it together, and it took a while to get together what I thought the software really needed to do to the sound. And I'm pretty satisfied with where it's gone. Satisfied to the point where it's, I went and got a fancy, well, not fancy, I went and got an analog console to work with, and then had to go and take Console, the plugin, and improve it to the point where it was able to beat the analog console that I'd got. I think I've gotten to that point. Maybe I need to sell 1 million of them and get a much more expensive analog console and then have Console beat that. But I think that would actually be fairly hard to do. So for the time being, I think I'm going to call this a successful experiment. Again, Console is $50. It's lifetime support, and I hope you like it.